In 1987, Fred Dekker set out to make a monster movie that also featured children. Not knowing what to make of it at the time, the Monster Squad left theaters pretty quickly. But then, it found a life on home video. As a result, there's an entire generation that absolutely loves the Monster Squad. Some might even say even more so than the Goonies. I'm Cinema Kane. Welcome to the Cinema Kane YouTube channel. And today we're going to be talking about the 35th anniversary of the Monster Squad. The Monster Squad started out as an idea of what if we took our gang, otherwise known as the Little Rascals, and we pit them against the Universal monsters, the classic Universal monsters. So in this movie, because it was not made by Universal, we get redesigns of the classic Wolfman, Frankenstein, Dracula, Mummy, and even the Gill Man, the creature from the Black Lagoon. What's interesting about the way they approached this is because they approached it with the way that kids of 1987 around the 12 to 13 year old age actually spoke. This movie is for kids, but it's rated PG-13, and that's because these kids curse more so than even the kids in the Goonies 2 years prior did. Which brings me to another thing. This movie is often unfairly, in my opinion, compared to the Goonies. And the reason I say it's unfair is because the similarities begin and end with the ages of the kids and the fact that they curse. Because the Goonies were looking for treasure and there was, the Fratellis chasing them. But in the Monster Squad, it's a group of kids that just happen to stumble across the idea that monsters are real. And if they are, no one's going to do a thing about it but them. What's the Monster Squad? Well, it's kind of like Miami Vice, I think. If you're familiar with the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If not, that's part of why this movie works, is because it is so 80s. It's the kind of movie you could probably only make in the 80s. At least I would have said that until Stranger Things came along. Because as much as Stranger Things owes the Amblin Steven Spielberg movies that it copies from, it also owes a great deal to Fred Dekker's The Monster Squad, because there are shots in the film of the kids riding bikes. There are shots in the film of the kids hanging out. It's Mike's basement. It's them, riding from place to place on their bike. All those things you love from Stranger Things are in The Monster Squad. Plus, one of the scariest on-screen Draculas I think I've ever seen in my life. And a lovable, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, a lovable Frankenstein's monster. The creature design work in this movie is great. The character dynamics are great. You've got the leader, you've got the little kid that looks up to the older kids. You've got the cool badass teenager that all the other kids are looking up to. You've got the loudmouth of the group. You've got the fat kid. Of course, you have to have the fat kid because every group had to have a fat kid in the 1980s and early 90s. All that said, they're all there. And the reason I bring this movie up is because whenever I say Monster Squad in front of people, there are one of two reactions I get. One is, what's that? And I always have to go to my go-to explanation for how to explain the Monster Squad, because it's not really a movie that can be explained all that well. I always say, imagine if the Goonies fought the Universal monsters. And most of the time the reaction is, okay. But if you grew up with this movie like I did, and you know the Monster Squad, and you hear some kid, or you hear someone like me say Monster Squad, the other reaction I always get is, Wolfman's got nards. Which again, if you know the movie, you know what I'm talking about. I love the Monster Squad. It's probably it's probably in my top 20 movies of all time. I just love it that much. I think it's such a great movie. Co-written by Shane Black, I might add, who, if you're familiar with Shane Black's work, he wrote the Lethal Weapon movies. He co-wrote, or he wrote some of the Predator movies, the original included. He directed Iron Man 3 and wrote Iron Man 3, I believe. Anyway, it's just got such a great legacy in my head, and in my opinion. And if you're game for it and you're a parent and you've never seen it, maybe watch it with your kids for the first time. Again, they curse, just like in Goonies. I'm putting that warning out there. But it's such a great, like, family-friendly horror movie. And I think that if your kids want to watch something a little bit scary this Halloween, maybe check out The Monster Squad. Sometimes it's available streaming, sometimes not, but it is pretty easily accessible if you want to rent it for a night. I'm your host, Cinema Kane. This has been our look at The Monster Squad for its 35th anniversary, and I'll see you at the video store.